It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sheila Ingle. She'll be talking to us about Elizabeth Jackson, mother of a president. Sheila has written numerous books of historic nature, of which she has some on the table in the back. So, meeting, please browse around and hopefully buy a few. Okay, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you An Evening with Sheila Ingle.
I'm supposed to put this on. That didn't work? Do I have to turn it on?
No, it's already on. It's on.
It's on? You can hear me? Okay, good. Okay. I talk with my hands. I'm one of those retired teachers that still talks with their hands, so I didn't want to put it anywhere where I would knock it off. It happens. It does. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. That's sort of an awesome title, An Evening with Sheila Ingle. Gracious, I feel like I need to be looking for whoever that woman is. Some familiar faces to here tonight, so glad to see you. Some new faces of some people that I've heard about before, and I just appreciate you being here tonight. The story I'm going to tell you is just a snippet of Elizabeth Hutchinson Jackson's story. And of course, when you're looking at historical figures, when you're researching historical figures, particularly in the middle of the 18th century, there's not a whole lot of information available. I would think that most of you have run into those kind of situations where you have to look at almost a gazillion places to get a paragraph that makes any kind of sense. My rule of thumb has always been that if I find something in 3 separate sources, that there should be truth to it. If you're doing research and you find like 4 or 5 different ways that something is said or described or an event or whatever, and there's discrepancy, it's very hard to know. It was fairly easy with Elizabeth. She married in Ireland to a man by the name of Andrew Jackson, not our president. She was Elizabeth Hutchinson at that time, and he was what we would call today a mill worker. He was a weaver. She was a weaver. They both came from families of weavers, but Andrew really wanted to work on the land. And it got to the point with the Scotch-Irish in Ireland, and you probably know this also, that the English just had them under their thumb, and they could not do anything. They could not own land. They could not hold public office. They were discouraged from celebrating religion the way they celebrated it with the Presbyterian Church, and it got to the point also that they could not even get married with one of the Presbyterian pastors. So Andrew, along with others, decided they had to leave Ireland, their home. And in leaving Ireland, they came to South Carolina. At this point in time, Elizabeth and Andrew had 2 sons, 1 a baby. And they came into Charleston. It was first thought that they came into Philadelphia, where many of the people came in from across the ocean, but they came into Charleston. And it really makes a lot of sense that they did that, because where they were headed was the Waxhaws. I would think you might know that the Waxhaws is now Lancaster County. And it just so happened that Elizabeth had 4 sisters that were already living in the Waxhaws with their husbands and with their children. So she wanted to go be with her family, which makes really good sense. And that's what they did. They came into Charleston. They moved up the road, and we know this not as the Philadelphia Wagon Road, but it was the Camden-Salisbury Road. And it started below Camden and then went up into Salisbury, North Carolina. And when we say road, that's a very generous description of it. We know that it was just a very narrow rut going through fields and whatever, the forest and all those things. They arrived in the Waxhaws, and of course, as Scotch-Irish families did, they got together to help him build a one-room cabin, help him build a barn on his property, and just to get them started, gave them food, gave them seeds, gave them, cows, a pig, all those things. Just like we've seen on Little House on the Prairie, it's never changed with the kind of family units that got together to do things, to help the newcomers that we would call them. And so they lived there for a year. Andrew was doing well on the land. He was being effective with what he was planting, with the animals that he was taking care of. And then in March of 1766, he went out in a ice storm, snowstorm, about that crazy weather we can have sometimes in March. And he had some sort of an accident. There's no clarity as to the accident that he had, but he died. And at that point in time, Elizabeth was 9 months pregnant with their third son, Andrew. So she would not, it would have been very difficult for her to live in that cabin, take care of that land with an infant and two toddlers, but she didn't have to do that. One of her sisters asked her to come and live with them. This was a sister that was sort of sickly. She'd had 8 children. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but she had gotten to the point that it was hard for her to do all the things that a woman during these times had to do. And I think I'm not going to go into a litany of the household chores or the housewifery, as it's called, but there were a lot of things. I mean, the men and women distinctly had their different chores to do. So she moved in with her sister and her brother-in-law, and she became the woman of the house. She took care of her sister. She took care of the 11 children between them. And you think about this, cooking, washing, cleaning, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it just makes me tired to have a visual in my head about it. But it was a good time for them. She was the storyteller in the family, and she told those boys and girls stories about their family in Ireland. She told them stories of people like William Wallace and the way that he was able to fight and win against the British for a while. She told them stories about her father who fought against the British, and they won in a specific battle. And she instilled in those boys and girls a sense of family, a sense of duty, a sense of country, as well as their faith. She had a very small Bible. I've not seen it, but it is at the Hermitage in Nashville. Probably about this small. You know those Bibles that we buy for children that fit very well in their hands? She had one that she carried around all the time. I don't know if you've seen the costumes of the women. I'm assuming you had. I did not come in costume tonight. It's too hot. But they tied their pockets around their waist. You've seen pictures of that, and there were slits in it so that they could hide something in it and carry it around with them. It was always available. This Bible was always available to her. She was a staunch Christian Presbyterian. And so she gave these lessons to those children, which I think formed them into the strong people that we saw them in the next generation. Okay, the Revolutionary War came to South Carolina, and we know what happened after that. Very interesting that We had battles in Charleston. We had Cornwallis coming in and taking over Charleston, and him sending that, what I like to call him as a traitor. It's all right, y'all. Mine will be next ringing. So, you know, it's just the way of our world today. But they, man by the name of Tarleton. Have you heard his name before? Bloody Ben, he was called, Bloody Tarleton. A young, what I think of as a whippersnapper sort of young man that had not earned his deserts in the British Army, but had sort of been given them. And as I understand it, his mother did some buying of some of the favors that he was able to get in the British Army. So anyway, he was what we would call a man with a mission. He had been told to get rid of the Scotch-Irish, to get rid of any that were insurrectionists against the British king. And so he came into the Waxhaws. You might have heard of the Battle of Waxhaws. It is celebrated in May. And what he did there in a 12-minute battle with the troops holding a white flag of truce up was indescribable. The men that fell had not only knife but bayonet wounds all over them. It was just a bloody massacre. And Elizabeth and her two sons saw that massacre. They saw it because they were so close, and they went in to nurse those wounded. As I understand it and what I've read about it, not only was it a bloody massacre, but also I have the privilege to say that my Revolutionary War ancestor was at that battle. He was not wounded, but he was taken prisoner and was a prisoner of the British for about 9 months after that before he was able to escape from where they held him. And I just, when I found that out, it was after I'd written the book, and it was so exciting because I'd done all the research, you know, on the battle and all that, and then I thought, he was there. He really was. He was a witness to this outrageousness. But this was a first taste for Andrew, who was 10 at the time, and his older brother Robert, who was 12. They had not seen this kind of battle. They had not seen this kind of, I'm just going to call it evil. And so in helping their mother with the nursing, it became almost like a point of honor for these two young men that they wanted to go fight too. Makes sense, does it not? They already had their own rifles. They'd learned how to shoot. Their older brother, Hugh, had been in the Battle of Stono Ferry outside of Charleston, and he had died there. And so they already had in the Presbyterian Church cemetery, their father and their oldest brother. And now they had seen this fight that had opened their eyes, and if you'll excuse the expression, sort of an old one, it put a fire in their bellies for defense, for defending what these people were coming in and doing to them. And so they begged their mother to let them join the militia. She, of course, said no, saying that there was just, you know, no way that she was going to let a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old get involved in the war. So for 2 years, she was able to sort of keep them there at the farm, doing things for the militia company that was around there and that kind of thing. And then it really got bad. They were having to run from the Waxhaws into North Carolina to evade the British, come back to the house where things had been stolen and taken up and destroyed, and then it would happen again. And after 2 or 3 times, the boys finally convinced her that they really wanted to fight for their homes. She had instilled that in them. They knew that there was honor in doing this, in fighting for their homes. They knew they were supposed to. And I think also they wanted to follow their big brother. They wanted to be an example to the community also. So at ages 14 and 12 at this point, Robert and Andrew joined the militia. And you think 14 and 12, that's still pretty young, is it not, when we think about going to war? But if you look at the records that have been kept, there were a lot of young men of that age. A lot of times the 12-year-olds were the banner carriers or the drummers or something like that, but still they were involved. And it was interesting to me that their militia commander chose to give Andrew the job of taking care of the horses. Taking care of the horses, and then also running errands, taking errands to news to the people that were around, that they heard about the British plans. And so that's what he did. And I thought when I first read that, well, that taking care of the horses, I'm not sure that that would be enough from Andrew, because I'd read enough about him at this point to know he had a fiery temper, number one, and he did not like to be told what to do. You know, there are people like that that have trouble taking instruction. But he fell into this job, and I guess he saw the importance of it, because if those horses, you think about the loud noises from a battle, if those horses, you know, would have run off, they would have lost transportation, they would have lost no telling what was in the backpacks of the on the horses and that kind of thing. And so it was an important job, and he recognized that, and so did his very best. Now his older brother Robert, he was on the line doing the fighting with the militia people. Then they were going home one day for a few days. There was nothing really going on in the area. And when I say they, I'm talking about Robert and Andrew. And they stopped at their cousin's house, not too far from their own home. While they were there eating breakfast, a major came in with his British troops. They'd been watching, they were paying attention, and you might have read this in some of the older history books. This little vignette is in there where the major told Andrew to clean his boots. And you might have seen the picture of it also, with the major with the saber up in the air with his arm headed toward Andrew. It used to be in some of the social studies books. I have not seen one in a while, but I remember vividly seeing it as a youngster myself. And after he was told to clean the boots, Andrew replied very blithely, which I find interesting in that, with, "I'm not going to clean your boots. I'm a prisoner of war." Well, you can imagine with the attitude of a 12-year-old saying that to your face, and you're the man in the position of power. And so he did raise up his saber, and he came down on the left side of Andrew's face. Andrew was able to get his hand up, and if you look at pictures of him even in old age, you will see the scars from that saber that he was unable to defend himself from completely. It is no wonder during the War of 1812 that in the Battle of New Orleans that he fought so strongly against the British again. Not only had they tried to take his land, but he had been accosted in an dishonorable situation by an officer. Well, the officer thought, well, there's one down. Let's see if Robert, the other one's going to clean my boots. He did the same thing to the brother. And of course, the brother said, "No, I'm not going to do that." So he got the same hit close to his head and shoulder with that saber. It was like this cruelty that we saw at the Waxhaws was reinventing itself in a one-room cabin. It was coming closer to home, if you hear where I'm coming from. It was not just out on a battlefield. It was now in part of the family's home. The two boys were marched off to Camden Prison, which was full of smallpox, a prison of the British that just Well, prisons are not a good place to be, right? They never have been. We can just say that. And at this point in time, they were taking care of the enemy, but they were not taking good care of the enemy. Many died during the night because of the smallpox. Men had gone blind. Men were screaming because sometimes this particular disease would go to the mind and it would cause a lot of distress there. And here they are, two young men, 12 and 14, in this Camden prison. Their mother was at home. She knew where they were, and she decided she was going to get them. The title of this book is Brave Elizabeth, and that's the way I see this woman. She was brave. She got two scrawny horses with her because she knew that they would be not fit to walk the mileage to get back home. She took those two horses and she went to Camden, all but knocking on doors to get information about how to talk to Colonel Rowden, who was over Camden at that particular time. And she finally found a way into his office. None of the documents that I read gave a reason how she got into his office, but she did. There had just been a battle there. There were prisoners of war being exchanged. There was a list on Rowden's desk, and with her pleading, with her asking to add her two sons to the list, for whatever reason, he chose to do it. He did have another list that had those that had smallpox on it. And so the assumption is made that these two are going to die anyway. They're not going to give me any kind of grief. They're not going to rejoin the forces. And so, yeah, we'll put them on the prisoner exchange, which makes sense when you're looking at it from the standpoint of the man in charge. And so she took both her sons back home. Robert was sicker than Andrew. She tended both of them for the smallpox, and if you've seen pictures of Andrew, you've seen the pits on his face from that particular disease. Robert died within a week, and so she had another burial in that cemetery to attend. Now she's left with one son. She's lost her husband and two sons, and she kept working with him all through the summer of 1870, and finally he was on his feet. And then Elizabeth heard that two of those precious nephews that she had helped to rear in her sister's home had been taken prisoner and were on prison ships outside of Charleston. And she, along with two of the other women there in the Waxhaws, decided that they really needed to go and see if they could help those boys and the rest of them. And we've heard the stories about the prison ships. They were just hotbeds of disease and misery. They just really were. They got to Charleston and they found the two nephews. They took food to them, took clean clothes, all the kinds of things that you would do to help a family member in a situation like that you're allowed to do, because of course they were under gun patrol, rifle control, while they were on the ships. They did that, and unfortunately, while she was there those first few days, Elizabeth contracted cholera, which was another disease that was very rampant on that particular ship. She only survived a couple of days and was buried in an unknown grave in Charleston. Her son, Andrew, never was able to find out where she was buried. Could not. There was just no location. And you think about wartime and you think about all the different situations and people dying of disease, and it was just a pressure-ridden time. If you go to Charleston, in the middle of the College of Charleston campus, you will see a monument erected to her. If you go to York County, and there is a monument in the Presbyterian Cemetery there to her, but there is no way that he was able to find out where his mother was buried. And that was a major loss to this 14-year-old. I mean, he'd lost his whole family, basically, and immediate family, of course. He had those uncles and cousins and that kind of thing. But he'd lost his mom. And I think there's something, she was, I guess, what we would call maybe the mainstay of his life. She was the one that had always been there. She was the one that took care of him, but not only took care of him, but taught him right and wrong, taught him about what he was supposed to do. And I think that is an important thing to realize, that he was left at sort of 6s and 7s, I guess I will say. I wanted to read a paragraph from what I wrote in the at the end of this particular book, which gives you a little idea of what I think about her. I admire Elizabeth Jackson, sometimes called Betty by our family. She was a fearless woman who lived a life beholden to no one. She forged her own path. Despite a hardscrabble existence during both the colonial and Revolutionary War years in our state, she persisted in doing the right thing and refused to be undone by tough circumstances. She earned her own living by weaving and saw to it that her 3 sons inherited their father's property. Obviously independent, she taught this by example to her children. And I think that's what drove me almost to her, even after I'd written 2 other books about unknown women here in South Carolina. These are biographies. Now there's some tweaking when it comes to dialogue and that kind of thing. That's an author's prerogative, so I've been told. But the facts are accurate. And when I first read about her and that carrying that Bible around, the way she strove to teach her 3 sons right and wrong and liberty and freedom and Jesus and his righteousness and all those things, in this kind of time when everything was uncertain, she was an amazing woman. And I'm just excited to say that in my research, Andrew Jackson was born in South Carolina and not North Carolina, even though there's been a little bit of hoorah about that through the years. And the reason I say that, and the reason I say that with confidence, that he wrote in 2 different letters that he was born in South Carolina. Okay? Anybody in here not know where you were born? I know I was born in Charleston. We know where we were born, right? And I think if he said it, if he wrote it, then he must have known where he was born. So I'm going on first-hand information, first account on that particular thing. Do you have any questions? Yes, Ann?
The cemetery that you said in Door County, is that the best one?
It is.
I have read it.
Do you really? Wow. Wow. It's a beautiful cemetery. The church, you know, it is too. I love, over there, you sort of go from York into Lancaster County, and if you're on, what is that road, honey? Five, okay, that we travel over there. There's a different feel. I don't know what it is, but there's a different feel to it. And it's not that it's not modern, you know, the houses and that kind of thing, but going into Bratonsville and walking in her house that was built for her in the 1700s, and she lived in it until she died. I don't know, to walk where these men and women walked, as you were talking about Festival. I'm going to be there on Saturday, and that was the thing about Kate, was the fact that hers was the first house that I walked into, and there she was. And it's so very real. You're thinking I have a really vivid imagination. Probably so. But it's that sense of history, I believe, that either captures us or it does not. Anybody else? Yes, Alan?
Part where it says the Andrew Jackson's home and statue put him on a horse.
Mm-hmm.
Which home is that?
That is the original land that his father had there, the Andrew Jackson State Park with the big statue, right? And that's the original land where they lived.
Their house there?
No, the house is long gone. I don't remember the history on the background on that, but that's where they lived.
In front of it, latched off of it.
Right. But it was right in there, the land. Anything else? Everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask? Y'all are a wonderful audience. I did bring my 4 books with me, and I'll be glad to sign them. John will be glad to take your money. I like stories, ladies and gentlemen. Can you tell I like stories? I do. And it's fun to write about stories. I just finished an article on the man who was the commander of the Citadel during the Civil War. And it was most interesting research on that. He was from Marion, South Carolina, and how his was the only action where a whole school, and it was over 300 cadets, I can't remember the exact number, but they marched out to go and meet with some of the Georgia troops to fight in the Battle of Tullafini against Sherman's troops. And guess who won, y'all? Those 1,000 cadets and Georgia militia. They beat over 3,000 of Sherman's troops, kept them from destroying that railroad. You know, we have gumption in South Carolina. I'm thinking, you know, we do. And we're gonna put up our dukes, so to speak, and defend our turf. And that was another thing that I admired so much about Elizabeth, that she taught that to those children in her care, that your turf is something to be proud of, it's something to be treasured, and it's something to fight for.
Andrew Jackson involved in Revolutionary War activity?
In here in South Carolina, he was the Battle of Hanging Rock. He was one of the ones there, and that's the one that comes right to my mind, Alan. I think there were a couple others, but that was the one that comes straight to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila.
Thank you.